Today's lesson is Who is Cupid? Hi, everybody. I'm Roger.
Hello, I'm Kiki.
As you know, guys, you can't forget this. Valentine's Day is coming up in a couple of days, so you better get your girlfriend a gift or you're going to have a big argument. But, of course, because Valentine's Day is coming up, we can't pass a Valentine's Day without discussing the love god, whose name is Cupid. And you probably know who Cupid is. It's that baby that shoots arrows at people. And if Cupid shoots an arrow into both a boy and a girl, they will fall in love.
Right. And the Cupid is basically a flying fat baby that matchmakes people, right? And today we're going to find out more about Cupid because he's not just a fat baby. There's actually a lot more to who Cupid is and also why he's associated to love and Valentine's Day. So today we're going to learn more about him. So let's listen to part 1.
Who is Cupid? The image of Cupid, a naked winged infant holding a bow and an arrow, has long been associated with Valentine's Day and love. But how did this connection come about? Let's have a look.
大家好，首先我们来看到名词 infant， 它的意思是婴儿。例如 Cindy's grandfather died when she was still an infant, so she has no memories of him. Cindy 的祖父在她还是婴儿时就去世了，所以她对祖父没有任何记忆。又或者说 Taking care of an infant is difficult, especially for first-time mothers. 照顾婴儿很困难，尤其是对新手妈妈来说。再来介绍片语 come about， 它的意思是发生或是开始出现、产生。例如 How did this problem come about? 这个问题是怎么发生的？再举一个例子 The argument came about when the customer accused the delivery man of not handling the package with care. 这场争执起于顾客指控送货员没有小心处理包裹。
Okay, so here's part 1 in today's lesson. The image of Cupid, a naked winged infant holding a bow and an arrow, has long been associated with Valentine's Day and love. So if you hear the word Cupid, then this image will come to mind. You're going to see a naked winged baby or an infant. An infant basically is the same thing as a baby. And this particular baby or this infant is holding a bow and an arrow. And that image has long been associated with Valentine's Day and with love. So indeed, yes, that's the image that comes to mind when I hear the word Cupid, a fat little baby holding a bow and an arrow. That's kind of an old weapon. You could use the bow and arrow to shoot arrows at your enemies or at animals or whatever. And nowadays, of course, bows and arrows are used in archery.
So it's interesting to think that a bow and arrow is something you hunt with. So does that mean that Cupid is hunting lovers?
Kind of interesting, yeah. Why would he connect lovers by using something that normally would kill somebody? But again, this image has long been associated with Valentine's Day and love. So here we've got the verb to associate, and it's often used with the preposition with to associate something with something else. It means they are related to each other. When you think of one thing, you think of the other.
So you want to link something to something else. But how did this connection come about? How did this idea of Valentine's Day and Cupid, or the thought of love and Cupid, how did this idea become or come to be? When something came about, it is when an event happens or an event taking place. So how did this connection come to be? So let's have a look and listen to part 2.
Before Cupid took on the image of a baby, he was known in Greek mythology as Eros, the handsome young god of love. Eros made people fall in love, but his reasons for doing so were not always benevolent. Sometimes he used his arrows as a form of punishment. In one instance, when Eros was insulted by Apollo, he pierced Apollo with an arrow, and made him fall hopelessly in love with a woman who would never love him back. In ancient Rome, Eros came to be known as Cupid. The Romans portrayed Cupid as a more childlike and less aggressive figure. Later, when 15th century artists began painting scenes from Roman mythology, many of them depicted the winged god as a plump, cheerful baby with curly blonde hair and rosy cheeks.
第二部分介绍动词 pierce， 这个字有刺穿或是刺破的意思。例如 The man was sent to the hospital immediately after a sword pierced his arm. 该男子的手背被剑刺穿后被立即送医。或是 A nail pierced one of the car's tires. 一根钉子刺穿了那辆车的一个轮胎。再来是形容词 childlike， 意思是像孩子般的、纯真无邪的或是单纯的。我们可以说 Emily has childlike skin. Emily 有孩子般的肌肤。再举一个例子 Sometimes Ivy's attitude is very childlike. 有时候 Ivy 的态度非常像小孩子。下一个看到名词 aggressive， 它是富于攻击性的、好斗的、挑衅的，但它也可以是积极进取的意思。例如 The child's aggressive behavior worried his teachers and parents. 那孩子的攻击行为让老师与父母很担心。或者 You must be somewhat aggressive if you want to succeed in business. 如果你想在商场上成功，就必须得有些冲劲。
Okay, so here's part 2 of today's lesson. Let's talk about it. Before Cupid took on the image of a baby, he was known in Greek mythology as Eros, the handsome young god of love. So here we've got the verb phrase to take on. That means you just simply adapt this image before it got this image of being a baby. Before that, he was known to the Greeks in Greek mythology as Eros. And who's that? Well, that's the handsome young god of love, and he did not have this image of a baby holding a bow and an arrow with wings like an angel, okay? So here we're talking about Greek mythology as compared to Roman mythology. So Cupid is the name in Roman mythology, and in Greek mythology, this particular god is known as Eros, okay? So if you're talking about mythology, you're just talking about old stories that were designed to explain the world. Lots of different cultures around the world have their own mythologies, like Norse mythology, Greek and Roman mythology, Egyptian mythology, Chinese mythology. Every country or old culture has these kinds of stories.
So, Roger, you're telling me that Cupid didn't always look like a fat baby with wings?
No, he looked like a handsome young god of love, not as a fat baby flying around with wings and holding a bow and arrow.
So Eros or Eros made people fall in love. So this young god of love, his job was to make people fall in love. But his reasons for doing so were not always benevolent. So when something is benevolent, it is something that is well-meaning or kind. So he didn't do it for the kindness or from the goodness of his heart. He actually had other reasons for making people fall in love.
Exactly. So again, if something's benevolent, it's kind, it has good intentions. Like, for example, I could say, oh, be careful around Joe. His intentions are not benevolent. He's basically rotten to the core. He's out for himself. He's out to cause trouble. He's no good. He's a bad apple. His intentions are not benevolent. But again, Eros could shoot bows and arrows, but his reasons for doing so were not always good, were not always kind, were not always benevolent. Sometimes he used his arrows as a form of punishment. Of course, you receive punishment if you've done something wrong. You might be punished, for example, in school. If you talk too much in class or used your smartphone too much in class, you might be punished for that, or you might receive punishment. and sometimes he used his arrows as a form of punishment. In one instance, when Eros was insulted by Apollo, he pierced Apollo with an arrow and made him fall hopelessly in love with a woman who would never love him back. Ooh, that's pretty bad. Of course, I think most boys have that experience. You really like a girl, but she just doesn't like you. She wouldn't even give you the time of day.
So one time, Eros was insulted by Apollo. So to be insulted by someone or to insult someone is to speak to or treat somebody with disrespect or with rudeness. So Apollo must have told Eros something that was very mean-spirited, that wasn't very nice. He was being rude to him, and this made Eros very angry. So he was angry. He decided to punish Apollo, and we know that Eros has his arrows, so he pierced Apollo with an arrow. When you pierce something, it is to poke through something with a sharp pointed object, and in this case it would be an arrow, but you can also pierce something with a needle. You can pierce a piece of paper with a staple, and you pierce your ears.
Right, lots of people have pierced ears. It's a very modern fashion statement. So he shot an arrow at Apollo and pierced him. I guess it probably got him in the chest or something, and as a result, Apollo fell in love with a woman that he could never get together with. She would never share his affections. And here in the next paragraph it says, in Rome, or in ancient Rome to be more specific, Eros came to be known as Cupid. Okay, so now we're going to Rome, and we're talking about the Roman name of this particular god of love. And there, this person is known as Cupid, and the Romans portrayed Cupid as a more childlike and less aggressive figure. So that's what the Romans did with Cupid. They, of course, had paintings and things like that, and they depicted him or portrayed him as a child. So childlike means like a child. That's different from the word childish. If you say someone's childish, that means they're not mature. They're behaving like a child and they should grow up. But here, if something kind of looks like a child, then you say it's childlike.
Right. And in this case, the Romans, they wanted the idea of Cupid or the figure of Cupid to be something that was nicer, or the idea of Cupid to be a less aggressive figure. So a less menacing person and somebody that is more loving. So when something is aggressive, they have very strong negative feelings towards something, and they can sometimes be violent. Okay, so when you're aggressive, you're very hot-headed, or you'll talk very aggressively, you'll talk very strongly, and they didn't want Cupid to be like Eros, so they decided to change the image of Cupid to be more childlike.
Right, he's less aggressive. He doesn't look like he's only out for himself. Like if you're trying to drive during rush hour, sometimes you do need to be aggressive. Or if you want to get ahead in the business world, you need to be aggressive. You can't be a nice person. And later, when 15th century artists began painting scenes from Roman mythology, many of them depicted or portrayed the winged god as a plump, cheerful baby with curly blonde hair and rosy cheeks. So, of course, back in Roman times, they did not have cameras. They did not have smartphones that could take pictures. They had to paint things. So that's a way you can depict art, by using paint. So they painted scenes from Roman mythology. They would paint images of the gods, like of Jupiter or Zeus or whatever he's called in Roman mythology, or Neptune, etc. And they were depicted, in this particular case, Cupid was depicted as a winged god. And, of course, he was plump and cheerful with blonde hair that was curly. So, again, to depict just means this is how you describe, or this is how you present something, especially when you're writing in a novel. You're trying to depict a certain scene, and you can also use the word portray. They are similar in meaning.
So we see that this character, this Cupid or Eros, his image has changed again. And instead of being a childlike character, now he is a winged god. So he has wings now and he is plump. When something is plump, they are kind of chubby. And when you think of plump, you think of something that's very cute. And sometimes you can also describe certain fruits as being plump. When you have a plump peach, it's a very juicy peach. And now this depiction of Cupid, he's become a cheerful baby. He's a small baby that flies around with his arrow and bow. And he has a curly blonde hair and rosy cheeks. So when you think of Cupid, it is way less aggressive now. It is a cute little baby. It's not harmful. And in fact, he brings lots of love to people. So this is now the new depiction of Cupid and also the idea and the image that we think of when we think of Cupid in modern day.
Now, Romans probably had a lot of white people, a lot of Caucasians, so of course lots of them had blonde hair, and that's how Cupid was depicted. Blonde, of course, refers to a light color of hair. In Chinese, you often say golden hair, but we use the word blonde more often. And we kind of follow the French spelling rules on this. If it's a boy, we spell it B-L-O-N-D, but if we're talking about the color of a girl's hair, then you add an E to it, but they're pronounced the same, blonde. Okay, let's move on now to the third part of our lesson for today. We'll listen to it first, and then we'll come back to discuss it.
As for Cupid and Valentine's Day, some agree that this relationship came about in the 18th century, when the tradition of making and exchanging Valentine's Day cards took root. Cupid began appearing on those cards, along with hearts, flowers, and love knots, as a symbol of affection.
最后看到 take root 这个片语，表示扎根或是深植人心。例如 After a few weeks, the seeds I placed in the soil took root and began to grow into plants. 几个星期后，我种在土壤里的种子生根了，开始长成植物。再看一个例子 The basketball player's excellent performance took root in Andy's heart and made him fall in love with the sport. 那名篮球员的出色表现深植于 Andy 心中，让他爱上了这项运动。
Let's wrap things up and talk about Cupid and Valentine's Day. As for Cupid and Valentine's Day, some agree that this relationship came about in the 18th century. So when we think about Cupid and Valentine's Day and when they started to be associated together, we will go back to the 18th century. That's when people started to put Cupid and Valentine's Day or the celebration of Valentine's Day together.
Okay, so yes, indeed, the relationship came about or emerged in the 1700s or the 18th century. And then we began this tradition of making and exchanging Valentine's Day cards. It took root. So here, took root is the past tense of to take root. That means it became established, it became common, and it was very difficult for it to go away. It became a tradition, and you can talk about this in regards to other traditions. When did the Chinese tradition of eating mooncakes during the Mid-Autumn Festival, when did that take root? When did that become common? And when did it become permanent?
So when you think about something taking root, a root is something that grows underground. It goes deep underground. So when you think about taking root, it's really something that has settled into something and they're here to stay. Cupid began appearing on those cards along with hearts, flowers, and love knots as a symbol of affection. Affection is the act of showing your love or showing how you feel about somebody, showing your emotion towards someone. So when you want to show affection, you want to show somebody how you care about them. And there are different ways of showing affection. And in this case, giving Valentine's Day cards is a way to show affection. And on these cards, we will think of symbols of flowers, hearts, and love knots to be a part of the design, and Cupid will usually appear on those cards.
Right, and of course, if you tie ropes, if you are a sailor, you need to know all your knots. Those are different ways of moving the rope around so it can attach things together. Like when you tie your shoes, that's a knot. But a love knot is when you take a string or a piece of rope and you kind of lap it around itself so it assumes the shape of a heart. Isn't that cute?
Yes, that's very cute. Now, that comes to the end of our discussion today. Let's listen to our lovely Henny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文一开始提到 The image of Cupid has long been associated with Valentine's Day and love. 好，那这边我们就是要介绍 associate A with B 的用法。Associate 或是念作 associate， 它当动词可以表示联想或者是使有关联。那我们除了用到 associate A with B， 也可以用被动语态 A be associated with B 去表达出两种常见的语义。第一个语义就是表达将 A 和 B 联想在一起，像是 Many people associate summer with the beach， 许多人会把夏天跟海滩联想在一起。好，那第二个语义是表达使 A 和 B 有关联，例如 These symptoms are associated with anxiety， 这些症状与焦虑症有关联。课文第二部分他提到丘比特在希腊神话中被称为 Eros， 是一位年轻英俊的爱神，他让人坠入爱河。那文中是用 fall in love 来表达相爱，坠入情网。那我们可以用 fall in love with somebody 来表达爱上某人。相反的 fall out of love 是指不再喜爱，后面同样可以接 with somebody 来表达说不爱某人了。那我们这边也补充几个跟恋爱啊、迷恋有关的用法。第一个补充的是 fall head over heels in love with somebody， 这是表达彻底爱上某人，深深的爱上某人。那其中的 head over heels 是用来表达彻头彻尾，完全地，深深地。好，那第二个补充的是 fall for somebody， 这是表达迷恋，倾心于某人。那么 fall for 它是源自于鱼看到鱼饵的动作，那引申的意思就是表达迷恋或者是有被骗的意思哦。我们来看一下，如果它的受词是人 fall for somebody 就是爱上某人，可是当这个受词是事物 fall for something 则是表达被某事物所欺骗，所以就要看上下文哦。我们来造个例句， Dexter fell for Emma the first time he met her。 Dexter 第一次遇见 Emma 就被她迷住了。第三个补充的是 lose one's heart to somebody， 这是把心都给别人了，意思就是倾心于某人，爱上某人的意思咯。那第四个是 have a crush on somebody， 这是表达迷恋，喜欢某人，通常是指对某人短暂而强烈的喜爱，尤其是可能青少年时期的那种短暂的爱恋那种感觉。举例来说I had a crush on Tammy's brother when I was in junior high. 我国中的时候曾经迷恋过 Tammy 的哥哥。好，那以上就是今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天的单字吧。
Infant. A week after his birth, the parents took the infant home. Associate. I have always associated pine trees with Christmas. Insult. Dan didn't intend to insult her, but his thoughtless comment ended up hurting her deeply.Portray. The artist portrayed the beauty of nature through his landscape paintings. Aggressive. That boy is very aggressive. He's always trying to fight with others. Depict. The novel depicts the knight's journey to save the kingdom from a dragon. Affection. Jared bought Lucy some flowers as a sign of his affection.
Discussion Starter starts now!
Okay, here's our discussion starter for today. The question is, do you think Cupid is a good symbol of affection? Why or why not?
No, I think Cupid is an odd symbol of affection because there are many different ways that we can show affection to someone. I don't need a fat baby to tell me how to love somebody or to show my love for somebody. So I don't think the Cupid is a very good symbol.
Well, I kind of agree with you. I don't think Cupid necessarily needs to be a boy. A Cupid could be a girl as well. But I do like the fact that Cupid is kind of chubby. That does kind of refer to abundance of love in a relationship. So I like that kind of symbol.
Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoy reading along with us. I am Kiki.
I am Roger.
See you next time.